Sword of the Seven Suns by Gardner F. Fox. Originally published in Planet Stories, Spring 1947. Read by Jon Gill. Part 15. Flane stared at it, wondering. The thought that it might need fuel to work never occurred to him. He looked on the gun as supernatural, and anything as mundane as ammunition for it was as foreign to his mind as the stars. There might be one more blast left, he reasoned. He gave it to Evelyn. It was dark now, and the 3 moons of Clarence swarmed slowly into the sky. Red fires dotted the stone plateau before the mesa, where Darksiders squatted or sat eating. On the mesa, men hastily bolted food and ran back to the entrance, drawing their weapons. There was no concerted night attack. There was worse. For soon the arrows began to arch among them, biting into leg and arm and chest at random. The steel-tipped shafts scattered the men, which sword and axe could not do. Soon they were all huddled behind the uplifting rocks at the mesa edge, where the shafts could not follow. A surprise attack caught a faceful of defending blades and broke away, as a wave from the seawall. Dawn found the men up more now bloody and weary, but the hot sunlight drove new strength into hack-weary arms, and they met each new attack with cries of scorn and defiance. Flane was everywhere, standing for long hours in the pass, his sword singing, encouraging his men by the magical slaughter of his blade, slapping them on the backs, encouraging, cajoling, commanding. All day and all night they made their stand. Baked by the day and frozen by the night, they grew gaunt and haggard, as lean as hunting wolves, and as dangerous. Men did not talk on the mesa now. They lifted lips in silent snarls. They caught dark glances from under lowering brows. Their hands grew used to the hilt of sword and the haft of lance. Some could scarcely unbend their fingers long enough to eat. Of the lot, Flane looked most wolfish. His black hair drooped, untended, loose on his shoulders. His uniform was cut and torn, disclosing blood-skinned, brown flesh ripped by axe and sword edge. But his muscles still rolled as before, and the blade in his hand was a portal to beyond, and for anyone who came face to point with it. Evelyn slept close to him during the night, tending the wounds received during the day. Under hot sunlight she was always at his call, with water and with cheer, for the men who were most in need of either. On the next day the Darksiders withdrew in order, going down the ramp and assembling on the flat plateau. Flane leaned on his sword and stared out over their heads at a horseman who spurred his mount across the tumbled rocks, lifting him in a jump. "A mechanic," Flane rasped, spitting. Now the All-High must indeed be smiling, for the fates could have no worse in store for us. They have come to join the Darksiders. A man naked to the waist and bearing a broken lance in his hand as a stabbing spear laughed guttily. "Good! I've wanted to take a few of them with me when I went." Flane smiled mirthlessly. "You'll have your wish, if the water holds out." He looked around, biting his lips. The axes and the swords and arrows of the Darksiders had been busy. Of the original 40 who dropped to the mesa, there were but 6 who stood erect, and of them, one was a woman. Hearth lay shorn from the shoulder to navel on the rocks below. He had met his hero's death. All of them were wounded. Even Evelyn had a red rag wrapped about an arm. Flane breathed harshly. They had made a stand. They had. Aye, let the harpers tell of this battle. Flane glanced at his blade. It was chinned and nicked, and hung by a needle of steel to the hilt. Laughing shortly, he tapped it against a lip of rock and watched it drop into the stones below. He went and drew the blue-hilted sword from the ornate scabbard and shook it in the air. "By the dead hand that held you, you'll quench your thirst this day, you blue beauty," he howled. The mechanics were pouring into the rocky plain now, and the Darksiders greeted them with cries of delight. Beside Flane, Evelyn said bitterly, "Thousands more against us." Flane laughed. "The odds even, darling." He rested on his blade, watching the big blond Darksider, who led most of the attacks with a gnarled club in one hand, walk toward them. 2 mechanics placed at his side. "Surrender, Flane of Clarn," the blonde said. "We offer safe conduct to you all." Flane laughed in his face. "The mechanics would never let me live, Darksider," he replied. "Better a death in the open air than a dagger under the ribs on a dark night while I sleep." He saw the mechanics scowl at him. The Darksider said, "We will come and take you." "Then come, club swinger. My sword whispers to me that it wants to look beneath your skin." The club-bearer waved an arm, and archers trotted forward to form a circle around him. The Darksider waved at the mesa, crying, "Sweep that spot for me. The time for play has ended." Flame went white. This was what he dreaded. A fight of war arrows to keep the passage clear while the Darksiders attacked. In the press of battle the archers could not fire, for their arrows would fell their own men as well as defenders. But with an arrow storm to clear the way, and then an attack in force. "Fall back!" he shouted. The arrows whistled, coming at them. Some broke against rock uprights. Some dropped and skidded down along the mesa floor. One or two found flesh, and dead men fell to fight no more. Flame whispered, "Four left. Four and Evelyn." With his red left arm he shoved her behind him, blue-hilted sword deflecting an arrow. Slowly he backed against the sheer gorge. A man dropped at his feet, the arrow still humming in his back. Another man, caught by a thrown spear, slipped over the edge of the gorge and plunged downward screaming. Flame and the man standing beside him looked at each other, chuckled grimly. "It was a good fight, Flame. We stood them off 2 days and a night," agreed Flame. "They'll put us in their legends, the Darksiders will. They like brave men," the man laughed. "As a ghost I'll come to their winter campfires and listen to their bards extolling us. It will be a reward in a way." Club in hand, the blond Darksider was leaping towards them, a line of axemen and archers at his back. Before them the Darksider saw 2 men and a girl, with her hair the color of sunset. In her white hands she held a violet gun. The 2 men were bloody and fierce, unshaven, in rags. Swords glimmered in their hands as they stood waiting. They had fought well, but the time for play was over. "Take them!" cried the club-bearer, but Flame astounded them by coming in himself, bent low. Right arm up and swinging, his blade came and went, and where it had been, the knees of a dying man buckled. Uniform in tatters, brown skin dyed red, he was a miracle of speed and sureness and slaughter. Behind him, Evelyn watched, dangerous as a tigress whose kittens are threatened. The violet gun came up, covering Flame's back. Men drove in for that unprotected back, daggers lifted. The violet gun belched once, and then it died. But that once was enough. The lavender fire sizzled and flared as it ate up the men and their weapons. But Flame had already whirled, and his sword stabbed out towards the purple flame. The blade swam in the amethyst mist, glowed brightly, shimmering with opalescent hues. With staring eyes, Flame watched the steel dissipate into drifting powder. He held half a sword in his hand. A cry of alarm broke from the lips of the Darksiders. They eyed the half-blade, mouths open in awe. From guard and pommel it coruscated blazing whiteness as the sun caught at the 7 globes inside the blue stuff. Like suns, those points of whiteness glittered, like stars. "The prophecy!" howled the Darksiders. "He bears the stars in his hand. He holds the key to the machine." The blond Darksider stared at him, frowning. He let the club fall until its knotted end hit the stone. "Is it true, Flame of Clarn?" he whispered. "Is that sword the key to the machine, as the prophecy has said?" Flame looked at the sword, at the blue hilt with its blazing pinpricks of light, at the diamond-shaped blade that was half a blade now. It was the truth. The diamond blade was key to the machine. Fool. Fool not to have guessed its diamond shape, and the star-formed guard, and the dead body beneath the spaceship, the keeper, of course. The stars in the hilt for the prophecy, and the blade for the key. "Yes," he cried hoarsely. "Oh, all highest, yes!" The blond Darksider dropped the club and knelt before Flame, lowering his head. A great rustling was heard as the other Darksiders knelt with him. Only the Mechanics drew aside, muttering. "You are him for whom the Darksiders have prayed year in and year out," he said. "You are the savior who is to come to unite Darksider and Clarnvan. You bear the key." Flame heard Evelyn sobbing behind him, and he lifted the sword and stared at it. He felt like weeping too, for the diamond-shaped blade was only half a blade now. The violet fire had eaten it up. The key to the machine was in his hand at last, but it was a ruined key. The Darksider was bowing and saying, "I swear fealty to the bearer of the sun-starred sword, for he shall be my keeper." Behind him, the others roared out the ancient oath, their voices lifting triumphantly. "By the grip that plunges home the blade, by the hand that is turned away to ward off evil, by the voice of the machine, I swear my oath and pledge my faith. I am obedient. I am true. I am his who bears the sword. The rolling echo of the oath was swept into silence, but still Flame stared at the broken sword in his hand. A ruined key. There was no hope now. Flame stood with legs apart and flung his head to the blue sky and howled his laughter like a madman, until froth grew in the corners of his mouth and tears rolled down his cheeks. End of part 15. Thank you for listening.